Jesus calls forth life from a place of death. This is what Jesus does when he raises his friend Lazarus from the tomb. It's also what I believe Jesus can do for us in this challenging time of the coronavirus. Many of us are having experiences of loss which might feel like a death. Loss of a job, loss of income, loss of freedom, loss of liberty, loss of relationships, at least in person to person for a time. These are challenging times for us all, and many of us might experience them as being something of a place of death. I'm sure you're familiar with the account of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, which is this Sunday's Gospel. If you haven't read it, read it here and then pause and come back to watch the video. It's worth reading the whole account because there are a number of parallels between what Jesus does for Lazarus and what he's doing for us, and there's some insights that I think might help us. Firstly, let's note that Jesus waited 2 days when he heard that Lazarus was sick. He didn't rush. We might also wonder at God's seeming delay at doing something for us. We're praying, but it might seem like nothing's happening yet. So we might wonder at that delay, just as Mary and Martha did for Jesus. Secondly, even in the face of her brother's death, Martha's faith was strengthened and brought forth. Firstly, she gave, the kind of faith that many people of her time had. She said, "Yes, I believe my brother will rise again at the resurrection from the dead." This was a common Jewish understanding. But then she takes a leap of faith to be bold and say something more personal. She says to Jesus, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ. You are the Son of God who has come into this world." This was a bold, personal step of faith for her. And this time might challenge us too about what we really believe about God. Thirdly, let's look at the fact that Jesus wept. Jesus felt such sorrow that he wept for his own experience of losing his friend, and he also shared in Mary and Martha's sorrow at their brother's death. Jesus felt real pain. Jesus felt everything that we feel because he was fully human as well as fully divine. And I believe that our God, whom Jesus revealed to us as being a loving Father, everything we know about God is true of Jesus. And so we know that when Jesus shows us his compassion and his own emotion and grief, God feels this too. And I believe that God feels with us and for us in this time of loss and wrestling with sickness and death in our world. You know, there's been so many times throughout history when there are major tragedies. There are famines and plagues and wars and disasters. And I believe that God feels each one of those and cares for people in each one of those. But as I was praying the other day, I just wondered, has there ever been a time in history when every nation of the world is afflicted as it is now? And as I wondered about that, I just tried to lean into God to say, God, what is your heart like? Your heart that can feel for every person in the world right now. It was beautiful to even try to sense how great is God's love and compassion in this hard time. And fourthly, people's response to Jesus' miracle was divided. There were people who came to faith in him because he'd done a miracle. He had raised Lazarus from the dead. But this same miracle also made people begin to plot against him. And it was this plot which ultimately led to Jesus' death. And I believe that there are people in our time who are going to lose faith because of all this, wondering what is God doing and why is God allowing such suffering in our world? It's a question people often ask in times of tragedy, whether global or just personal. We wonder where God is when we're suffering, and I really recommend Richard Leonard's book, Where the Hell is God?, that wrestles with this question. And I think there are other people, though, for whom just their habit of church going is broken now that churches are closed, and that they won't repair it when our churches are open again in some weeks or months' time. They'll simply walk away from their faith that didn't touch their experience. I hope so much that won't be you. Instead, be like Martha, whose faith grew through tragedy. There are people for whom their faith and their understanding of God at the moment doesn't quite explain, doesn't grasp everything that's going on. And so they're going to go on a spiritual search and go deeper to try and understand God in these new challenges we face. I hope that's you. I want that to be me too. So let's go on this spiritual journey together. of trying to lean into God and understand, what is God doing? Let me just make a distinction too, though, about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, which is different to Jesus himself being resurrected from the dead. And when God raised Jesus from the dead, it was God the Father who did this, not Jesus. He couldn't bring himself back to life. He was completely dead. But when Jesus raises Lazarus, it's God's power, but it's working in and through Jesus. And this is a distinction you might not ever have made before, but I think it's an important one. Often our prayers to God are more general. We're asking God to fix something or to do something. But our prayer to Jesus can be more intimate, more personal. Our prayer to Jesus is discipleship, where we can actually ponder Jesus' words as if they're words spoken directly to us here and now. We can try to live into the experiences of Jesus, his actions of the gospel, and say, how would Jesus act towards me? How would I act toward him if I were there? It's much more intimate, and this is how we really can deepen our discipleship of Jesus. This time, where many of us are going to slow down, there's less things on, so we'll have more time to read, to think, to pray and reflect, can be an important time for us of really getting to know Jesus better. Jesus lived and died in a time of enormous challenges, so what he says and does has relevance for us too, even in the most dire of circumstances. And I'll explore more of Jesus' message and his good news in the coming weeks, but for now I want to invite you, if you don't already, to make a quiet time to speak to Jesus from your heart. Speak to him about how you're feeling, what's going on, what you're experiencing, what you're seeing going on in the world. Be honest, be open, and speak to him as someone who has experienced all that you've experienced too. Jesus has experienced all the happiness and love and joy and the anger and the sadness and the fear that we've experienced too. So share that with him, and then be open to let Jesus share his heart with you.